we'll just cover over quickly some of the spells and how they work. The open magic spell is used when you're exploring, and when you are faced with a magically sealed door, you would use the open magic spell. Resurrection allows you to gain a life point by placing an R in your life box on your adventure sheet. You'd put an R in there, and the next time that you was required to suffer and use a life point, you would instead erase the R from the adventure sheet. And it costs 15 strength. We went into how strength will affect you. It's for the period of the quest that you are in at the moment, and then when you enter in the town phase, that strength deduction is lost. If you happen to cast 2 or 3 of these spells, you will be suffering minus 15 strength, and you always need to have enough strength to be able to make these costs. Again, you're not permitted to cast spells if they're going to remove your last health point, for instance, or they're going to take your strength into negative values. You need to have those available as a resource to be able to cast those spells. The next two are healing spells, and they restore lost health points, and the key is that they need to be lost. They don't increase these values above their primary or adjusted rates, so your current will never ever go above those adjusted rates. The maximum that it will restore is up to those values. There's a few direct damage spells that you can cast. They're Fire Blast, Fireball, Ice Storm and Lightning here at in the lower section. They cost various different amounts of hit points, and they deal various amounts of damage, and they give bonuses to the next round of combat and penalties to the monster on various spells. There's something called Magic Armor, which adds +1 to your defense total, and it quite clearly states that you can only cast this once per encounter. The +1 to defense will last for the entire combat round, and it gets added to your defense. It's not an armor value, it's not a shield value, it is for your defense. And so if James was to add +1 to his defense through casting Magic Armor, it would actually be applied to this value here. And we went into this in another video of how defense works, but basically if a monster was to roll equal to or less with its damage die, a natural roll on its damage die equal to or less than the adventurer's defense value, then the adventurer will, before all other damage is assigned and dealt with, will automatically deduct whatever his total defense was. So if he had a defense of 2 and he cast Magic Armor, he would have a defense of 3. If the monster rolled 3 or less on its as a natural roll on its die, then James could remove up to 3 points of damage directly from the monster's damage total. The next few spells that we've got are bonuses that will apply to the very next roll that the adventurer makes with a D100. So they can be used in or out of combat. They cost either 1 or 2 health points depending on the gain, and they will add +2 Dex, Strength and Intelligence, and they will apply to the die roll even if you're not testing that particular characteristics. So for instance, if you'd cast Skilled and you gained +20 to Dex to the next D100 roll, if you didn't roll a Dex test, you would lose the advantage of that actual spell on your next D100 roll. So let's say we had to roll Intelligence. The fact that he gained +20 Dex had no relevance to the actual skill check that he was making, which was an Intelligence skill check, and so it wouldn't benefit him, but the spell would still be in effect and would still be used up. There's a few other spells. The Alter Time would be used outside of combat, and it removes 1 shading from the time track. So if you're busy shading in these pips and for whatever reason you decide that the next one or future ones you don't want to have to deal with because it's going to penalise you in some way, it might trigger the use of oil which you don't have, or you don't wish to encounter a wandering monster, or you don't have any food, or you don't want to refresh the time tracks because you're going to be suffering the effects of poison and disease, you can keep altering time back, and you can keep changing and removing, and you would shade off one of these clock faces for each spell that you cast that was correctly dealt with. And as you go backwards, these spells, these triggered effects won't be triggered as you go backwards. They only get triggered as you go forwards. So if we was up to this stage here and we was thinking, oh no, next round we're going to have to roll for a wandering monster, let's alter time, and then let's alter it again. We've gone back two, so we would end up needing to shade this face in, and then that would trigger the oil. But the fact that we went backwards, it wouldn't trigger the effect that's shown on the time track. One of the more combat great spells is Clone, and what this allows the adventurer to do is to create a complete replica of the adventurer to fight for it. The spell description tells you, at the start of the next combat round, a clone of the adventurer appears to fight the monster. The clone is an exact replica and gains all the benefits of the adventurer, but tracks its damage separately. Any damage received is now dealt to the clone. Damage cannot be deflected, and when the clone's health points is reduced to 0, it disappears. Until the clone has disappeared, the adventurer is not permitted to attack, as they are busy controlling the clone. So your clone will have an identical health point value at the time that it is created. So in this instance, if Sir James was to create his clone, he would spend the 3 hit points first. That will be 15. He would make his skill test, roll to see if it was successful or not, and let's say it was. The clone would then gain all of the replication of his equipment, plus would gain his current health point value. So he would be beginning on 15 health points. Then you would fight combat, and your clone would then begin attacking using either strength or a dexterity based weapon. They would not be permitted to begin creating new clones of themselves and so forth. They would purely cloned, your adventurer is purely cloned for combat and attack, and all the while that they are in place, your adventurer will not be attacking. The next one is Clumsy, and that will apply to monsters an attack value, a minus. Control, you will be able to control the monster in the next round of combat. Counter, the spell, this is one of the few spells that you can use without needing to sacrifice your combat action. So to cast any of these spells in combat, you're going to be required to use a combat action to do that, and that will forfeit your attack. So when you're casting spells, you are in effect losing an attack. And some of them, there's 2 spells in the game. One of them is Counter, and this will allow you to cast the spell and then you give up your next attack. So the monster rolls on its dark magic table to see what type of magic is going to affect you for this combat round, and you could then cancel its effect by casting that spell, and then you would lose your next attack roll. Invisibility will allow you to escape a escape test automatically. Lightning we've already been into. Mirror image. At the start of the next combat round, 4 illusions of the adventurer appear, confusing the monster. When the monster scores an attack and has rolled its damage, the player rolls 1d10. If the result is a 1, the monster hits the adventurer and all the illusions vanish. If the result is 2 or more, the monster has struck one of the illusions, which disappears, and the adventurer suffers no damage. When all illusions have vanished, the spell is over and combat returns to normal. So what you would do in the case of mirror image is you could cast it, if it's cast successfully, create 4 images of your adventurer. You enter combat, you roll your dice. If the monster ends up hitting and causing damage, you need to decide what monster, whether it's going to be you or one of the illusions that is struck by the attack, and so you would roll the d10. As long as you didn't roll a 1, it would hit one of your illusions, and then you would have to remove one. If you ever roll a 1, then the monster will have hit you, and you will suffer all the damage for that round of the combat, and all of the illusions will be depleted and destroyed. So next up is manipulate, and it says reroll any die just rolled, and if cast in combat it doesn't require combat action to use. So this is, we can use this at any time during combat when we've made a roll for any reason, even the monster's rolls, etc., or outside of combat. We don't need to spend a combat action in combat when we're using it in combat, and it will allow us to just make a spell test. If we're successful, then we get to re-roll any part or combination of that die roll, just like you do when you use a fate point. Summon. This one will allow you to roll on the encounter table and summon a monster to fight on your behalf, and the monster will attack the monster you're fighting and will be under your control for the combat round until it has been killed. Once the summoned monster has been killed, or the monster you are fighting has been killed, the summoned monster will disappear, because you can't carry on manipulating and controlling a summoned monster while you're trying to explore the dungeon and so forth. And so at the end of all combat, the summoned monster will in fact disappear. The monster fights with all of its usual abilities, but they are applied against the monster that is your opponent. Lastly, there's a spell called Drain Life, and that says during the next combat round, all health points lost by the monster restore an equal number of health points to the adventurer. And so the key word there is restore and or lost to the monster. So firstly, let's go into what it means by lost. If the monster was to say have 5 health points left and you actually dealt it 7 damage, it would only lose 5 health points and then it would be dead. So you would only actually regain 5 health points and not the 7 that was the 2 points of overkill. The monster would have 5 points remaining, and so it could only lose 5 points. Then the second thing, restore, like we explained with the heal and healing spells, is it restores lost health points. So if you happen to manage to do the 5 points of damage, it would only restore 5 if it didn't take you above this adjusted level. It would take you up to that adjusted level. So if that was, we've got an adjusted level of 21 on our health points for Sir James. If Sir James had hit the monster for 5 points of damage and he only had 16 left, then he would gain 5 hit points, health points, to take him back up to 21. But if he only had, say, 18 remaining, then it would only take him up to the 21, and the excess would be lost. The extra 2 would be lost and wouldn't be applied. It will never go above the health point value.